Welcome to Journey to Queendom, the sacred space where survival ends and sovereignty begins. I'm your host, Marci J. Duncan, and this is where we lay down the cape of overachievement, code switching, and self doubt, and we pick up the crown of softness, wholeness, and authenticity. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Journey to Queendom. I am your host, Marci J. Duncan, and I'm so happy that you decided to join me once again, another week. So, first, I like to check in to see how you guys are doing. Of course, as I always say, we're doing some work here, right? If you are going along with me on this journey, then you are discovering, you are being curious, you are being enlightened on things that you probably didn't even know before. I hope anyway that your journey has been good to you, right? It's hard, but I hope it's been good to you. So I'd just like to check in to see how you are doing. If you guys want to talk to me in the comments, feel free and we can chit chat. I can comment back to you on my next podcast or in the comments. You choose, right? This podcast also is on YouTube. So if you want to see me, you can log on to the Journey to Queendom podcast YouTube channel and you can find me there as well. All right, so last week we were talking about um, the power of letting them and letting you, the freedom in that, discovering that freedom. And we also talked about the power of softness and how we redefine what that is for ourselves, not necessarily what the world or the culture says about softness and who has permission to be soft and who doesn't have permission to be soft, right? We were kind of talking about that. And I asked you guys some questions. First of all, our first question was, who do you need to let go of in order to obtain or reclaim your freedom? Did you think about that? The next question was, where have you taken on too much responsibility when that responsibility wasn't yours in the first place? Right? The next question was, what does freedom feel like in your body? What is it for you? Because you get to define it, right? And we also went over our ought to list or I should list. And I hope that you discover some things on that list as you were candid and honest with yourself that didn't need to be on that list, that was not your responsibility. And hopefully, we are finding the courage to step in to our power to say no and to do what makes us feel good. All right, let's get into today's episode. And we are going to be talking about intimacy and vulnerability. Now, if you know me, if you knew me, these two words, yuck, get away from me. Now, this was always perplexing to a lot of people because of what I do for a living. And what I do is I teach acting and I am an actor, and I also direct and coach actors. So, being an actor, it requires you to be very vulnerable. And sometimes you are in close proximity and close relationship with the people that you work with in your cast. And so, when I have conversation with people and I'm telling them, I have these issues with intimacy, they are so confused. Well, how can you make me believe that you are in so much pain on that stage? Or how can you make me believe that you love that person on stage and you are not being vulnerable? Are you saying that you're not being vulnerable up there? And honestly, I don't really know. I don't really know. What I do know is that is pretend. And it is very difficult for me, or has been difficult for me in my real life, to display vulnerability and to allow intimacy in my life. Um, and it's because of course, as we've been talking about, some of the things that have happened in those closed doors that we try to hide behind, the trauma of the past or trauma that we are living in, however, it exists in our lives. But I know for a fact that intimacy and vulnerability were a direct coping mechanism for some of the traumatic incidents that happened in my life. Now, I'm sorry, I'm recording at home and you're going to hear noise in the background. So forgive me. My son, my husband are home. So stay focused. Okay. So I know that vulnerability and intimacy was something that I didn't allow myself to engage in or allow myself to experience or allow myself to feel. Because to me, intimacy and vulnerability was weakness. That was a weakness to me. In my mind, I'm just talking about my experience here. In my mind, it was weakness. Also, in my mind, when I did allow vulnerability or intimacy, it was taken advantage of. It was abused, right? And also, what happened is that there were times where I felt very, very vulnerable, very afraid in that time when I did feel vulnerable. So I did not like the way that I felt when I was vulnerable because in my past, when I was vulnerable, I was afraid. I was feeling out of control, like I didn't have any control over what was happening or my response to what was happening or my environment. I didn't have any control over my environment, which meant in order to cope with that, my brain said, in order to make you okay, to bring you out of this as a functional human being, I'm going to send the message to your brain that vulnerability is a scary thing and it should be avoided at all costs. So, this is the message that my brain told me year after year after year, um, as far as I can remember, second grade. So, from the second grade up until this message has been repeated to me over and over again. And not only this message, but there were other instances where I felt extremely vulnerable, and that vulnerability did not feel safe to me. It did not feel safe to me. It did not feel good to me. It wasn't rewarding. Um, and it just made me double down on the fact that, as I like to say all the time, it doesn't take all that. It didn't take all that, right? And of course, if that's how I felt with vulnerability, then you can imagine my issues with intimacy. I think a part of the problem that I was experiencing, of course, now I have been and still am actively going to therapy and working to understand some of my coping mechanisms and how to evict those coping mechanisms that are not necessarily serving me now. So I'm able to see things in a different way than I was when I was going through these things and the years that I was stuck in this mindset. I was stuck in this thick fog of what I thought vulnerability was and what I thought intimacy was. Now, first and foremost, my body had already associated that vulnerability was a bad thing. So, intimacy to me was a bad thing. Vulnerability was a bad thing. The language that I had learned surrounding intimacy and vulnerability were things like weakness, out of control, taken advantage of, naive, um, transactional, right? Be- Because one of the things that I attached to vulnerability, of course, and intimacy was sex, right? Was things that led to the act, right? So in my mind, I programmed my mind to believe that intimacy and vulnerability were all things leading up to the act. And the act was very much transactional, and it was to please the other person, right? Or to give the other person what they wanted. Like there was nothing in it for me. There was nothing about vulnerability or intimacy that I took pleasure in, that 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 I craved or desired, because it was distorted. It was absolutely distorted. And I didn't know that it was distorted at the time. But as I'm starting to peel back these layers and starting to make these connections between my past and my present, I see and I remember how strongly I held on to belief systems that were absolutely false. And not only were they false, but they were keeping me from receiving and giving love in the way in which I secretly desired to. And I say secretly because I didn't want to admit that to myself, that I needed these things, because I didn't have them. And if I didn't have them, there was a lack, right? Or there was a deficit. And I didn't want to deal with that deficit. I didn't want to deal with that lack. So I just convinced myself that I didn't need it. I didn't need romance. I didn't need intimacy. I didn't need vulnerability. And furthermore, I didn't realize that intimacy was not just, relationship oriented between, you know, love interests. That's not the only form of vulnerability and intimacy, but that is where my brain went every time those moments came up, right? And I know that my body would react the same way. I would get clammy, I would lose my ability to talk, right, coherently. Not that I couldn't talk, but communicate. I would talk in circles. I would talk in circles because I couldn't find the courage to say what I really wanted to say or communicate clearly. Um, and I would also feel my body shrinking back. And I would feel like I was losing control over the situation and losing control over my ability to maintain my confidence, to maintain my sharpness, to maintain all of the things that I took great, great joy in titling myself. It was harder for me to grasp those things in moments of vulnerability and transparency and intimacy. So as I started to work with my therapist, um, she started to explain to me the differences between intimacy and vulnerability, and also reasons that I might have put up walls. And so we started to connect the dots. And one of the ways that she defined intimacy was, and my pastor used to say this too at my church that I went to, he used to say, intimacy is in to me see, like allowing someone else to look into you, to really see what's on the inside of you. My therapist also put it like this: being vulnerable is being able to lay down your armor, everything that you use to protect yourself, to protect your heart. When you're in the presence of someone that is worthy of the gift of vulnerability from you, then you will be able to lay down your armor because there's no reason to fight. There's no reason to protect yourself. There's no reason to defend. There's no reason to be suspicious. There's no need to block any blows. So vulnerability is being able to lay down your armor, and intimacy is allowing someone else to see into you. And when I heard these definitions coming from her, I just wept because I realized I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be able to lay down my armor. Just the visual of that was so enticing to me, but it was also extremely terrifying to me. The idea, first of all, my brain said the idea that somebody would require me to disarm myself. Why would you want me to disarm myself? I need to have my armor. I need my armor. My armor is what I need. But the other side of my brain is saying, what must it feel like? What might it feel like to be able to exist and completely relax? You're not on guard. You're not on having to watch up all night, having to watch your territory. I'm being facetious right now and exaggerating, but I'm sure you understand my point. These feelings I felt, and I felt them very, very deeply on a cellular level, that my body was doing things that I didn't even know. I couldn't clock it. I just knew that this is the way that I was. I had no idea why I was this way, but this was my reality. And when I was in relationships, I absolutely didn't allow the other person to see into me. I absolutely never put down my armor. I definitely did not feel safe enough to give my armor over to not only lay it down, but give it over so that it's not in reach. That never happened. And I can also say that before I met my husband and our relationship started to grow, outside of my siblings, very few people really me, saw me in the times that were dark, the times that were hard. I really didn't allow people to see me deal. I didn't allow people to walk with me as I walked through painful times in my life. I felt safer grieving alone. I felt safer dealing with things on my own. And so I never gave people the opportunity to help me because, of course, I had convinced myself that I didn't need it because I didn't have it. And do you see that cycle? The other thing that I was noticing was that the type of person that was picky about what they wanted or disagreeable or um, a person who paid attention to detail, extremely attention to detail, those kind of people would annoy me. And the reason why they would annoy me is because I admired their ability to say what they wanted, to not consider themselves a not consider themselves extra or not to consider themselves an inconvenience, right? because I was always agreeable. I was always trying to make sure that I was on the team. I'm playing my part. Everything is cool. Oh, you can't give me what I want. It's cool. I'll figure it out. Oh, you're not going to be able to come through for me. Cool. That's cool. I'll just, I'll figure it out. I'll do what I need to do. You know. So whenever people, and I met several people, a lot of my friends are very detail oriented. A lot of my friends are people that if something ain't right, they're just not going to go along with it. A lot of my friends are very outspoken in terms of what they want and how they're going to get it. They're not just going to agree to agree. They're not just going to go along to go along. So obviously, this trait was very attractive to me, but also terrified me. So instead of looking at that trait and saying, how can I do that? I sat back and went, why are they being so difficult? Why can't they just go along? Why can't they just, you know, do it for this once? Be inconvenienced for a little bit for the sake of the bigger, you know, the bigger goal. Why can't they just go along? But the truth is that those people were absolutely being their authentic self. And there was nothing abnormal about that. But my brain, because of the way in which I used those coping mechanisms, saw it as intolerable, right? As annoying, as aggravating. Because again, I was looking in the mirror with that reflection coming back at me saying, you're not being specific. You're not being communicative. You're not saying what you want. You are just going with the flow, and that's not really what you want. It was staring me back in my face. Again, those people allowed themselves to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm going to put myself out there, even if it means somebody is going to get mad with me. I don't want to do that. And they just go ahead and speak up. I was not able to do that. My ability to protest or to go against the grain was not very strong. Now, there were moments in my life where I felt an incredible push to do a certain thing or to go a certain way or to block out noise and just do the thing. There were several times in my life where I felt that push. And again, I do believe that that was God pushing me in a direction that he wanted me to go versus me, going in that direction on my own. And I felt I had the courage to speak up. I had the courage to stay the course, right? There would be times where, I would get a call from Mississippi saying, hey, could you come do this role? I'd say yes immediately, but I would still be teaching in Pensacola and I was still teaching in Alabama. So I would go to work, teach my class in Pensacola, leave Pensacola, teach my class in Alabama, then leave Alabama and go to rehearsal in Mississippi at night and do it all over again. Wake up at 4 a.m., do it all again for 4 to 5, 6 weeks, right? Now, of course, that was an incredible inconvenience to me. That was an incredible inconvenience to my family. But somewhere in my brain said, you can't turn down this opportunity. You can't. You can't turn down this opportunity because behind this saying yes to this may be a bigger yes, right? And you don't want to do bad with this director because then they're going to think all these things about you. They're going to think that you're not serious about the art and you say you want to work professionally. Here's a professional job. You need to do it. And that may have been true, but it didn't mean that I needed to beat my body down to do it. Or it didn't mean that I had to put all of my eggs in that one basket, as if other opportunities wouldn't come by that didn't require such a sacrifice from me and my family. Now, my friends, immediately no. Immediately no. They would have never done that. Never done that. And that was the thing. I did stuff like that all of the time. I would be driving back and forth from Destin to Spanish Fort to Pensacola to teach my class, then come home, then go direct a show in Destin. You know, I went to Kentucky for 3 months, 3 or 4 months to do a show up there, to do several shows up there. You know, I have been everywhere. I have been everywhere. And don't get it twisted. I am proud of the work that I have done, extremely proud. I would not be who I am had it not been for that work. But at the same time, I could have treated myself better. I could have allowed myself to be honest and vulnerable with the people in my community to ask for help, to ask for support, to ask for what I needed. But I couldn't. I couldn't. When I got married, of course, things started to become more visible. These tendencies and these issues of vulnerability and intimacy started to really surface because now I am doing life with another human being who is very different from me. I'm city, he's country. I'm fast, he's slow. I'm an artist, he's a mathematician, right? Um, but us merging our lives together, it became very clear that there was something wrong with the way in which I was showing up in the relationship. I always say that I can audition for any show and at least get a call back because I know how to work the room. I know how to give people what they want. I can read a room in 10 seconds and I know what kind of people I'm dealing with. And I can quickly adjust and give them what they're looking for, as close to it as I possibly can. And I can do that. And it works well in my industry. Like I can audition and I can get that job. But now that I have the job, how am I going to maintain? Right. And I often thought about that in my relationship. When we were dating, I knew that he was very into working out. So I got I got serious about going to the gym so that we could have that. I got very healthy, very um health conscious, and I was doing the thing. And I started to actually enjoy it to where I was going twice a day. So I could pick up on little things about my husband that I perceived that he liked or that he favored, and I could quickly make that adjustment. But of course, as the dating process went on and went on and went on and went on, that's a long time to maintain a persona that wasn't really you. And of course, Marcy started to show up for real, right? Because we're getting closer, and that relationship is requiring more of me. And now it is becoming difficult for me to give as much as I was receiving. And I could see that there was something wrong with that. And of course, I doubled down in my therapy to try to understand what was happening. And it took years. It took years for me to be able to understand what was happening and to change my language to match what I felt and not out of survival mode, right? There were things that I had defined that were based on trauma that was abnormal. But that was my truth. That was my foundation. And that's what I knew. And it wasn't until looking into the mirror of my husband that I realized that something was faulty in that belief system. And because of the kindness and the consistency and the acceptance and the love and the compassion of this man, it made me want to be better for him. It made me want to be better for myself. It made me want to be better for my sons. And I started to investigate, and I got curious to try to figure out, why is this so difficult for me? And it seemed as if the longer I was married, the more in which it came out, the more it came up to the surface. My husband and I, we were trying to have a baby. And because of all of my health issues, it was very difficult for me to get pregnant. And I remember praying and praying and praying and praying and asking God for a baby, and it just never happened. 7 years later, after we prayed and went through all the things, I became pregnant. And after I had my son, another side started to surface, which was I didn't know how to share my son because I raised my first son by myself. I made all the decisions. I had all of the control over what happened and what didn't happen with my son. He was with me everywhere. It was just him and I. But now I am in a totally different situation with a partner who is very involved and very much in love with this child, just like I am. And I was having trouble computing that. I was having trouble sharing this child. And I said, oh my God, something has happened. Something has happened to me, and I need to understand what's going on. Because I realized I was seeing this relationship, this marriage, as some sort of competition. Like, who does it better? And now parenting together, it has to be me. This child has to prefer me. He has to choose me. And I started to really see all of these things started to become unraveled. And I knew I was in trouble. I was in trouble. I remember I would get home from work before him, and I would just be so exhausted. And I would lay on the couch. And as soon as I heard that key in that door, I would jump up like there was fire in my pants to go and look busy because I had to be busy. I had to be doing something. It couldn't be that I was just laying on the couch exhausted, because that meant I wasn't handling all of the things with ease, like I wanted him to believe, like I wanted everybody to believe. Hey, if you want to continue the conversation, stay tuned for part 2 of Intimacy and Vulnerability. Thank you for walking this stretch of the journey with me. If something in today's episode stirred your spirit, share this episode with a sister. Leave a review or connect with me on social media. Remember, your softness is sacred. Your healing is your birthright. And your queendom, it's already within you. Until next time, keep rising and claim your inheritance. This podcast was brought to you by Artists at Play, nurturing the artist within.